I found the letter that changed everything. They say secrets rot in silence, but mine festered like an open wound for a decade. For 10 years I held my tongue, buried my rage, and watched the man I loved kiss me with a mouth that had once whispered promises to another woman. I kept the lie tucked inside me like a tumor, until one day the tumors were real, and the lie refused to stay hidden. I was 62 when I found the letter. I'm 72 now and dying, and I no longer intend to die quietly. My name is Helen Carver. I live in a quiet suburb outside Milwaukee. Once a nurse, now a widow in waiting with stage 4 lung cancer. I never smoked a day in my life. Ironic, isn't it? Life never needed a cigarette to burn me down. It happened on a rainy Tuesday, the kind of day when everything feels damp, including your spirit. I was packing up old winter coats to donate when I found the letter tucked inside the lining of my husband's gray overcoat. The coat he hadn't worn in years. The one I always hated because it made him look like someone else, cold or distant. Fitting, I suppose. The envelope was soft from age, the ink slightly faded, but the handwriting was unmistakable, elegant with just enough flair. Not mine. "Dearest Michael," it began. I read it slowly at first, then faster, as if the words were knives, and I couldn't get stabbed quickly enough. She spoke of our beautiful boy, of how grateful she was that Michael was still supporting them discreetly. She hoped one day the child could meet him, though she respected our agreement. Our agreement. I felt my breath leave me, not dramatically, not with a scream or gasp, but in a quiet, paralyzing exhale, as if some truth inside me had been knocked out cold. I read the letter 3 more times. Then I just sat there on the floor, surrounded by wool coats and plastic donation bags, trembling. I felt something inside me collapse, not just my faith in him, but something bigger, like time itself had folded in half. Michael came home late that evening, as always. He walked in, kissed me on the cheek, and poured himself a glass of scotch like nothing had changed. But I had. I watched his every movement, how his fingers trembled slightly as he set the bottle down, how he avoided my eyes when I asked how work was. I said nothing about the letter. I made dinner. I laughed at his terrible joke. I even held his hand in bed. But inside me, something had opened, something dark and patient. I knew I had to learn more. I knew I wouldn't rest until I knew everything. But first I had to pretend to be the wife who didn't know. Because silence, I realized, is the most powerful weapon in a war of betrayal. And I was just getting started. A second family behind my back. I became 2 women that year, Helen the wife and Helen the investigator. I smiled across the dinner table while secretly creating a spreadsheet of dates, credit card charges, and bank transfers. It's shocking what you can uncover when you stop trusting and start observing. I learned to spot the tiny cracks in his lies, how he'd always take a business trip near Chicago once every quarter. Always the same hotel, always the same $400 restaurant charge the night before he returned. At first, I convinced myself it was just an affair, a fling, something shameful but meaningless. But the letter said our boy. That meant there was more. I hired a private investigator. I told him it was about a business associate I was vetting. I was ashamed to be the wife left in the dark, too weak to confront, too afraid to destroy the life I'd built. 2 weeks later, the PI emailed me a file that confirmed what I feared most. Michael had a second family, a woman named Janine, 12 years younger than me, living in Evanston, and a son, Brandon, then 16. The file had photos, blurry but damning. My husband in a grocery store handing a young man a white envelope. The 2 of them hugging outside a bookstore. A woman with auburn hair waiting in a parked car, smiling. Michael never smiled at me like that anymore. What gutted me most wasn't just the betrayal, it was the timeline. Brandon was born during my 2nd round of chemotherapy. While I was weak and bald and trying not to die, Michael was building a family with someone else. While I was vomiting in bed, he was learning to swaddle a newborn. The rage made me dizzy, but I couldn't scream. I couldn't even cry. The silence had become my armor, and oddly, I wanted to keep it. I wanted to watch him, study him, see if he'd ever admit it. He never did. Instead, he brought me soup, rubbed my feet, told our friends how strong I was. Strong, what a stupid word. He funded Brandon's private school quietly. He gifted Janine a used Lexus in 2013, all while complaining to me that our retirement fund was tight. The man had two lives, and I was footing the emotional bill for both. I once stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced what I'd say. I know, I read the letter, I saw the photos, but each time my voice cracked, my legs shook. I imagined his eyes shocked, apologetic, or maybe just cold. So I stayed silent. Until one night, I found myself standing outside their house in Evanston. I watched them through the window like some sad ghost. Brandon was laughing. Janine brought out a birthday cake. Michael was clapping. And for a moment I didn't recognize him. Not because of age or distance, but because that man in the window looked happy. And I hadn't seen that face in years. I stayed silent and paid the price. Silence isn't peace. It's poison served in a porcelain cup. You sip it every day smiling until your insides rot. For 10 years I swallowed that poison. I cooked his dinners. I folded his shirts. I smiled when he brought me flowers from the gas station, as if daisies could erase a decade of betrayal. I watched him age beside me, his hair graying, his belly softening, but I never saw regret in his eyes, not once. The truth is, he got away with it. Brandon graduated from college. I watched the pictures trickle into Michael's inbox, a cap and gown, a proud smile. I watched Michael's fingers linger on the photos before he quickly closed the tab, thinking I hadn't seen. But I had. He was good at hiding the boy from me. No visits during the holidays, no slip-ups in conversation, no scent of other lives clinging to his clothes. He was meticulous like all good liars are. And I was tired. The cancer came back when I turned 68. It hit harder this time, bones, lungs, liver. The doctors said manageable, but they always say that at first. I didn't tell Michael for a month. I wanted to see if he'd notice, if he'd feel it, if some connection between us would light up and scream, "She's fading." He didn't notice, not even when I coughed blood into the sink. One morning he left early, said he had a dental appointment. I knew it was Janine, knew it in my marrow, so I followed him. I drove behind his silver sedan for 40 miles, my hands trembling the whole way. He parked outside a quiet cafe. I watched as Brandon walked in tall and broad-shouldered, now a man. He hugged Michael like a son does his father, tight, warm, grateful. Michael cried, and I finally cried too. Not because he had a son, but because I had no one. Our daughter Lily had moved to Oregon after a fight with Michael about something I don't even remember anymore. They hadn't spoken in years. I never forced the issue. I couldn't afford to lose the last sliver of family I had left. And still I never told her about Brandon. Because even after all this, some sick part of me still wanted to protect him, still loved him. Until the night I collapsed in the kitchen, alone, crawling to the phone with blood in my mouth and panic in my chest. Michael wasn't home. He came back hours later, flustered, blaming traffic. I was already in the ambulance. I looked up at him through oxygen tubes and said, "Where were you?" He hesitated too long. That was the moment the armor cracked, and the silence began to scream. The diagnosis that shattered my mask. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and disappointment. I lay there under harsh fluorescent lights, tubes snaking into my arms, the beeping machines announcing every second I hadn't yet died. And beside me sat Michael, holding my hand like he hadn't broken every promise that hand had ever held. The oncologist didn't mince words. Stage 4 metastasized, prognosis months maybe. Palliative care, comfort not cure. I looked at Michael expecting something. A gasp, a tear, even guilt. But all he said was, "We'll fight this, Helen." He hadn't fought for us in a decade. I nodded. Not because I believed him, but because I was tired of pretending to be the kind of woman who wanted to be believed. After the doctor left, he tried to feed me spoonfuls of soup. I turned my head away. That night, while he slept in the reclining chair, I unlocked my phone and began to write my daughter Lily an email. It was time. I told her about the letter, about Janine, about Brandon. I attached the photos. I explained why I never told her, how I feared she'd walk away from both of us, and I couldn't survive being abandoned again. Then I hit send. The next morning she called in tears. She'd fly out the next day. I felt something thaw in me. For the first time in years, I felt like a mother again. Michael noticed the change. "Who were you talking to?" he asked casually. "Lily," I replied, staring him dead in the eyes. He looked surprised. "You told her?" "Yes." His face paled. "Told her what?" "You know what?" The silence stretched. He looked away. I let the moment hang until it hurt, then said, "You could have told me. Once. Just once." He swallowed. "I didn't want to lose you. You lost me anyway." He didn't argue. He couldn't. That day I asked to be discharged. I wanted to die at home. The doctors arranged hospice care. Lily arrived that evening, her arms full of groceries and her eyes full of questions. She didn't press. She just hugged me longer than necessary. Later I found her outside talking to Michael in the garden, voices low, tense. He came inside afterward, red-eyed. "She hates me," he said quietly. I didn't answer, because what mattered now wasn't whether she hated him, but whether Brandon knew, and he didn't. So I wrote another letter. This time it was from me. I told him who I was, what I knew, how I forgave him because it wasn't his fault, but not his father. I asked if we could meet, just once, no anger, no drama. He replied the next day. He said yes, my final act of truth. We met at a small cafe near the hospital, quiet and tucked between a bookstore and a florist. I arrived in a wheelchair, pale and exhausted, my oxygen tank trailing beside me like a reluctant child. Brandon stood as I approached, tall, broad-shouldered with his father's cheekbones and my husband's cautious smile. But his eyes, they were kind, unweathered by betrayal. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said. "I wasn't sure I should," he replied honestly. We sat. I didn't touch my tea. He didn't ask why. He knew I was sick. I'd told him everything in the letter, or almost everything. "I'm not here to blame you," I began. "You didn't choose this. You didn't ask to be born into someone's lie." He looked down. He never told me he was married. I know, he told no one. We talked for over an hour about his childhood, his mother, how he always wondered why his father disappeared for weeks at a time, why they never met his family. "He was kind," Brandon said, "but secretive. I always thought it was me." I reached across the table and touched his hand. "It was never you," he cried quietly, and then so did I. As I left, I gave him a small box. Inside were copies of the photos I'd kept all these years, the original letter from his mother and the ring Michael's wedding band. "He doesn't deserve to wear it anymore," I said, "but you deserve to know the weight of what it meant." Brandon hesitated. "What do you want me to do with all this?" "Whatever feels right," I answered. "Live better than he did." When I returned home, Michael was waiting in the living room. He looked up at me as I wheeled in and asked, "Where were you?" "I met your son," I said. He stood. "You had no right." "No right," I laughed. "I had every damn right. I gave up 10 years of truth for your comfort. I sat in silence while you built a secret life. I almost died keeping your shame buried." He opened his mouth, but I raised a hand. "I'm done protecting you, Michael. I'm done pretending I don't know what kind of man you are." He stepped forward, then stopped. His face, once composed, cracked into something ugly, fear, anger, maybe regret. But I no longer cared. "You should know," I added, "I gave Brandon your ring." He paled. "Why would you do that?" "'Cause he deserves to know what betrayal looks like, up close." Michael left the room, slamming doors like a child denied dessert. I slept better that night than I had in years, because the truth was finally spoken, and I was no longer afraid to die with it. The last weeks came fast. Pain settled in my bones like an old tenant returning home. Breathing became a conscious effort, speaking a luxury I rationed. Hospice nurses came and went like clockwork. Lily stayed by my side. Michael, he drifted through the house like a ghost, unsure whether to comfort or hide. I didn't speak to him much after the confrontation. What else was left to say? But I wasn't finished. There was one thing left, a truth too big to carry into the grave, too necessary to be buried beside my silence. I had written it all down in a letter addressed to everyone, Lily Brandon. Janine, our extended family, Michael's colleagues, even the church ladies he so loved to charm. I included the photos, the letter, every detail, every date. Then on a cold Monday morning, I handed it to Lily and asked her to send it after I passed. She hesitated. "Are you sure, Mom?" "Yes," I whispered. "He built a house of lies. Let the walls fall." 3 nights later, I woke up gasping. My lungs had turned against me. The nurse called Lily. She held my hand while the oxygen mask hummed softly. My eyes fluttered open one last time and I said, "Tell the truth, always, no matter what it costs." Then everything turned quiet. But I didn't leave in silence. 2 days later, the letters arrived. By then, my body was cooling in a white hospice sheet, but my story was just beginning to ripple. Michael's world cracked. Friends stopped calling. Church elders distanced themselves. His business partners asked questions he couldn't answer. Lily told me later through trembling lips that Brandon had shared the letter online. The post went viral. A story of betrayal, of love, of silence and revenge wrapped in grace. Thousands commented. Some shamed him. Others praised me. Many cried. Brandon never spoke to Michael again. Janine Lilly said finally learned the full extent of the lies and left. And Michael, he sat alone in our kitchen staring at an empty chair across the table. My chair, the one he took for granted for decades. The legacy he left was shame. The one I left was truth. Even in death, I had more presence than he ever gave me in life. And that more than any scream or slap or courtroom battle was justice. Because the truth doesn't die with the dying. It lives on in whispers and letters in sons and daughters who refuse to stay silent. If you're reading this, let my story be a warning. Silence may seem noble, but it's a slow suicide. I stayed quiet to protect the image of a family, but all I did was shield a lie while it devoured me from the inside out. Speak your truth early, clearly, and without apology. Betrayal thrives in secrecy. If someone breaks your trust, they don't deserve your protection. And if you're the one tempted to stray, remember this. The scars you leave behind may not bleed, but they never heal. Love is not possession. Marriage is not immunity from pain. And forgiveness, while divine, should never be demanded by those who haven't earned it. Tell your story. While you still have a voice, while someone still needs to hear it. Helen Carver.